All right, I'm here with Christopher Bohr. He is an official for Ultimate Hoops, and we're going to ask him a few questions today. First off, how did you get into refereeing?
I started reffing about 16 years ago. I was a teacher at De La Salle High School, and one of the tutors or teacher aides there was also a ref, and I just inquired with him about getting into it and needed some extra money because I was teaching, and just that's where it started. Started doing the youth stuff on the weekends, picked up a few lower level JV games, and after about 3 years started doing varsity, and that's where I've kind of been ever since.
Okay, what do you think of as an official when you think of the term makeup call?
I think there's some validity to it, but I think it's one of the things that we as officials try not to do. I know in my mind I don't ever consider anything I do a makeup call. I think some newer referees tend to get a little bit nervous and a little intimidated and may make a call because they're feeling sort of pushed into it. But after doing it for 16, 17 seasons, I don't feel I do that anymore. So,
what's the highest level that you've officiated at?
Probably the best basketball I've done is here at Ultimate Hoops with the over at St. Louis Park, the Open Leagues. We got some good players. I did do a JV game. I've never aspired to do college. It takes a lot of time and energy to do college, and it's very taxing on your schedule. And I had raised 3 kids that all played hockey, so I never had the chance, or I never opted to do college. So.
Okay, so we're going to get into the charging rule in a bit here, but what's the hardest call for a referee to make?
I think that the player control foul, or as you say, charging, is probably the hardest call to make. Mostly because the mechanic is different, is slightly different, and you have to take that split second to not only think about the call that you're making, but also think about the mechanic that you're going to go through when you do it. And so, when you're first starting out, to put those two things together, all of a sudden it makes you hesitate, makes you freeze a little bit. Once you make that first one, you're okay though.
So what is the actual call in charging? Because I know there's a lot of confusion that kind of goes with that call.
There is a lot of confusion with the call, mostly because it's not so much that people don't understand what the call is, but most of the time people aren't refereeing the defense. When you start refereeing, one of the first things you learn is that you need to referee the defense. The position of the defense is what determines whether there's going to be a foul or not. And most people, when they're watching, they're looking at the offender or the offensive player, and they're basing their decision on the actions of the offensive player. When I'm refereeing a basketball game, I'm looking at the defender. The position of the defender is what determines whether we've got a foul or not. In a player control foul, if the defender starts out in what we define as good defensive position, where the defender's squared up to the offensive player, he's got his feet square to him, he's looking straight at him, and that the offensive player moves into him, that's when you get a player control foul. To kind of sum it up, it's a little more complicated than that, but I think that the clarification is that you need to referee the defender, find out where the defender starts, and then that's when you determine whether there's a player control foul made or not.
Can the defender be moving and still draw a charge?
Yes. One of the things I always tell people is that as soon as a player or a coach tells me that he was moving, that tells me they don't understand the rule. Yes, a defender can be moving. Any good defensive player that draws a defensive player control foul generally is moving, because they're trying to beat the player to the spot. Now, the only time that really comes into play is when the offensive player leaves the ground and goes up for a shot. You have to make sure that he's established that position before he goes off the ground. But generally speaking, if he's established his position and he's moving with the ball handler, and the ball handler goes into him and hits him square on, then it's a player control foul. One other aspect of it that I think a lot of people miss is that, talking about moving, is that the player can even jump up in the air. As long as he jumps straight up in the air, if the player charges into him and he hasn't broken his plane, it can still be a player control foul. It's not one you see called very often. I think in the 17 years I've been doing this, and I've done a lot of games, I've called it one time. Generally what will happen is the player will jump straight in the air, the player will go to the basket, you'll see contact, and it'll be a no call. And the offensive player 9 times out of 10 will look at you and be looking for a foul, but because we're refereeing the defense and we see that he jumped straight in the air, that's why there's no foul called.
Awesome. Thank you. That was very helpful, and Ultimate Hoops Nation definitely appreciates it. Thanks, Chris.